Great.
As always, a massive warm welcome to Coffee Buddies. Here we go again. We've been going now for some time. We did our marathon with the biotech Gate Digital a couple of weeks ago. So I think we did 16 Graham, and last week we did some fascinating things about venture funding with the Virginian BioCluster, and then we did something about monoclonal antibodies for pets. And we are continuing our journey of entertaining and informing, engaging, and I think we're certainly doing that. And we've got the new format is that I talk with an inspiring and interesting person. We're lucky enough to have Hakim join us today to do that. But before I introduce Hakim to you all, we've got a lot of interesting things going on, and I think one of the things that we're picking up as we go through our journey is this interface between digital and classic therapeutics. And for me, it's almost wet work, which you can do with a pipette and a needle. And then on the other side, you've got this fascinating thing called a computer, and you've got data, and you've got digital. And one of the things that Graham and I have detected in the last year or so as we've done this is how many different people turn up under this term life science. And I think it's extraordinary, actually, what we're seeing, and sometimes we hear what they do. And one of the keys to understanding what they do is the language. And I think Pilar or somebody mentioned before that some of the language, when we get into deep therapeutics, is difficult for digital to understand. And when we get into digital, it's often difficult for people like me, who are basically drug hunters, to understand. So we're very, very lucky to have Hakim come to talk to us today, because he's got an approach to both. And what we want to do is just introduce you and welcome, Hakim, and maybe you say who you are and what you do to the group.
Well, thank you, Tony. Thank you, Graham. Delighted to be here this afternoon. So I'm Hakim. I'm one of the 4 co-founders of Closed Loop Medicine. Got a bit of a background in life sciences originally, starting out at the Babraham in Cambridge, then off into management consultancy, purely working in life sciences and healthcare. Found myself doing quite a lot of work with UK government on the policy around some of the organisational structures you may recognise within the NHS in terms of the academic health science centres and setting up the academic health science networks. And then moved on into a role really sitting at the interface between the life sciences, tech and digital sector and the NHS, where I was running an organisation in the north of England across 8 hospitals and 8 universities, trying to leverage their experience to be the best possible partner for a life sciences company or a tech company to do a clinical trial, test and evaluate their product in the NHS. And it became apparent over the years that everyone was coming to the NHS with individual siloed interventions, whether it was a drug, whether it was an app, whether it was a diagnostic. And there was one point when I was working there where there was a drug company, a diagnostics company, and a digital company all talking to us about the same care pathway in the same month, and none of them were talking to each other. And it was clear that the system needs a more joined up approach to care, linking devices, linking drugs, linking digital. And that's what led me towards the other co-founders, and we formed Closed Loop Medicine a few years ago.
And it's almost an ancient story about disconnected parts and bringing it into a system. I mean, so what, just tell me your thought process in founding this company. I mean, there's so much innovation, Hakim, around the world. Buyers are absolutely overwhelmed by it all. So is it about giving a clearer way of navigating a purchase? So is that your idea, or tell me more about your founding idea?
So I think the founding concept really comes from both the clinician and patient need, and that's to have a far more joined up approach to how they would receive and deliver care. So thinking about the clinician perspective, what are those areas where a clinician would normally always want to both prescribe a drug, but also intervene with lifestyle changes or behavioral nudges towards a better patient outcome? where is it that a clinician actually needs much greater data so that she can make a decision on a change to that patient's care? And for a patient, being prescribed a drug, you can go to Boots or Lloyd's and pick up a drug, but then how do you access the behavioral care? When, at what time? Is it directed to you by the system, or do you opt in and use it at a time that is right for you, that you can engage with it in the quiet and peace of your own home, for example? So for us, it was really around thinking, where are those cases where we need to optimize the bringing together of the non-drug therapy with the drug therapy? And where is it that real world data collected by the patient is going to better inform the clinician's ability to make decisions that get to a long-term better outcome for the patient? So for us, it was trying to simplify it for the clinician, trying to simplify it for the patient, and ultimately to simplify it for the health system. And if we can't do that by improving outcomes and reducing costs at the same time, then it's not going to fly. So we've always got that view of making sure this is something that's going to be cost effective within the system, but also ultimately it has to improve outcomes.
Fantastic. So you've got a couple of slides to show us, Hakim, so maybe you can bring up the first one.
Yeah, let me just share screen. So apart from "you're on mute," the other well-known phrase is "can you see my screen?"
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah,
wonderful.
Brilliant. So thank you again. I'm really keen to share with you what we're doing at Closed Loop. We've all had experiences of fragmented, disjointed care, whether that's the care we've received or that of a loved one. What I want to share with you today is our approach at Closed Loop Medicine for creating an integrated care package that enables patients to receive what they need to at the point of prescription. And we do that by giving every drug its real-time digital companion. So the founding of the company goes back a couple of years now. We've brought together an amazing group of people who have got experience in drug discovery and drug development and digital health. So Dr. Paul Goldsmith, our Chief Medic and Innovation Officer, background in Danio Labs in the Cambridge cluster, and then at IESO and at Sleep Station. So experience of digital and drug, but still a practicing clinician, so sees exactly what the needs are at the coalface. Dr. David Cox, another medic, then McKinsey, was the Chief Medical Officer at Headspace, and most recently at Amazon Audible doing their behavior change, has a wealth of experience in behavior change and digital engagement with patients. And then Dr. Felicity Sartain, a chemist who's spent many years now acting at the interface between large European funded complex projects, and is our COO and brings the whole company together. So it was those different disciplines that we recognized needed to come together to run and organize a company like Closed Loop, which sits at that interface between the life sciences sector and the technology sector. And what we've been able to...
And that must be a language issue between three, what did you say? You had a chemist, a doctor, and I'm intrigued by Dr. David Cox, what he does, but there must be a real interesting worldview that those three have that are completely different.
Completely different experiences, completely different worldviews, but interestingly all come to the same conclusion that care needs to be joined up. And that what brought us together to form Closed Loop. I think, Tony, to your question, it really goes much, much further when you then go to what we were able to do with great support from Cambridge Angels, Longwall IQ and BGF, is build out the team. And under one roof, we now have software developers and engineers and coders alongside people who manage and run clinical trials and do drug development. And there, the language is very, very different. Two worlds, two cultures, two ways of working coming together under one roof. And that really is quite special.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Let's move on.
So what is it we're trying to solve? Well, it's trying to get the right regimen for the right patient at the right time. And we know that for most chronic diseases, the dose of the therapy and the dose of the medication is very rarely optimized. Limited number of choices in terms of what's available, but equally in terms of the behavioral therapy, it might be that it's a group session or a face-to-face session, a time that doesn't really work for the patient, or maybe it doesn't even work within the course of the therapy in terms of the timing. We know that most chronic diseases aren't managed optimally and very low adherence as a consequence. And some of that is caused by not having the right dose of the therapy or the dose of the behavior change to go alongside that. And by dose, we think time and amount. If it's not happening at the right time and not the right amount for you, that could be whether or not you better engage with video content or face-to-face content. You've got to be able to optimize it. And ultimately that then leads to the challenge we have over patient adherence and compliance. We will know the facts that 50% of medicines aren't taken properly. So what we're aiming to do is optimize the time and the amount of the behavioral and lifestyle nudges and interventions that you can make through the power of having a smartphone in a patient's hand, as well as the drug therapy.
I mean, it's just one question, Hakim, is the medical profession ready for this? Because I mean, it's only what, 80 years since we had a sulfonamide, and I mean, you know, we were running around on horses only 80 years ago. I mean, this is almost changing medical practice, isn't it? So that, again, medicine in many ways is very old-fashioned. It's still very empirical. So this is, I'm just trying to understand. I mean, are doctors ready for all this?
So two ways of really looking at this, Tony. So yeah, yes, you could say that this is quite new and innovative approach, and maybe the system isn't ready. Or you look at it and say, this is exactly what clinicians have been doing for centuries. It's just been done on an individual way, in an analog way, with no real information. Every clinician, when they've got a patient in front of them, wants to be able to do the very best for their patient, whether that's fiddling with the timing of the medication, the amount the patient's taking to try and optimize for the individual, whether it's making sure they get to the right therapy sessions and get the very best expertise to support them. And so all of these slight changes, tweaks at an individual level are being made by healthcare professionals all around the world. What they lack is an automated way of doing it. What they lack is the ability to capture the real world data between clinician visits. What we're trying to do is sort of put, as Paul fondly puts it, the perfect clinician just on your shoulder every day, able to better understand what you need. And so one way of looking at it is it's something that's been done for ages and we're just providing a platform to do it. But equally, with any new technology entering a healthcare system, there's always going to be, you know, reticence to take it on board. And so for some, it will be seen as something new and something different. And to me, the word digital is one of my least favorite words because we don't talk about digital banking. We don't talk about digital movies. We just talk about Netflix and online banking. Digital health really should just be health in the 21st century. And what we've seen for the consequence of COVID is a much greater uptake and engagement through online and digital platforms. The world that we're going to be entering post-COVID is going to be fundamentally different as patients and physicians have demanded the use and need of digital ways of engaging and treating. And so I was on a BIA webinar a couple of months ago now, right at the beginning of the COVID outbreak. And Steve Bates quoted Lenin in saying that in some... yeah, he did.
What's up to Steve? My goodness.
He's always been Labour.
Exactly.
Yes. Sorry, Hakim. Yeah.
No worries. Whereas he said in some decades nothing happened, in some weeks decades happen. And I would argue we've seen a decade's worth of digitization of healthcare in the last few months. And so, yes, it is new, but I think the world has woken up. The genie is out of the bottle in the terms of how easy it is for patients and clinicians to use. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see as we roll through the pandemic, whether or not that goes back or people start better understanding it. I think it's also worthwhile just recognizing it's not just the ease of the use of the platform in terms of helping patients who are shielding access a GP, but it's actually an education of all of us of the importance of remote monitoring and timely intervention. I mean, I know the track and trace system has got its challenges, but what we're all learning is that actually we need to track, trace and intervene at the right time, and you can only do that with data.
So, I mean, I think your argument about removing the word digital is a very strong one, because you don't talk about the pen, do you? So it's the same thing. Anyway, next one, very good. Next one.
So how are we taking this forward? What are we doing as a company? So what we're developing within closed loop medicine is a combination therapy, a combination of a drug, and that drug can either be a CLM owned drug or a drug that we work in co-development partnership with specialty generics and pharma companies. It's then a platform technology, which is the data capture from the patient, whether that be a patient-reported outcome, so a patient filling out a questionnaire, or some of the passive data that can be picked up from the smartphone. And that enables our optimization of the regimen. And then where it's appropriate, because it's not going to be appropriate for every care pathway, we have the ability to provide a digital therapy. So this being a software as a medical device, evidence-backed, regulated with claims that digital intervention can support an outcome for the patient. The bit that we're doing that's unique, because actually all of those things are done in isolation, is combining those together under a single prescription. So we've had to develop quite an interesting quality management system that many of you will recognize because it speaks to GXP, but equally we've had to incorporate the ISO and IEC standards that you'd work to for a medical device manufacturer. So we found a way of co-developing drug with software as a medical device.
So digital therapy to you is when your phone, I mean, is it literally as simple as when your phone buzzes, you take your tablet? Or is it that, you know, when your phone buzzes, you stand up and take your tablet? You know, what is it that this stuff called digital therapy?
So I think there are a variety of words that people have put digital in the front of. So digital health, which seems to capture all of the lifestyle and wellness apps. These are the ones that more often than not haven't gone through rigorous randomized controlled trials and haven't got a regulatory status, but they're there to support the patient through their journey. You then have digital medicine, which probably includes some of the software platforms people are familiar with in terms of electronic medical records and e-prescribing, and then a digital therapy. So this is a therapeutic intervention that is getting a patient to a desired outcome that's gone through clinical trials, it's gone through regulation, and has claims associated with it. And the first one of these was from Pear Therapeutics in the US called Reseto, where the FDA have regulated as a standalone therapy as a digital therapeutic. And not just Pear, there are now a number of digital therapeutics companies in the US, the UK, and emerging in Germany as well, where they're developing standalone interventions that sit on the smartphone.
But they are command, they are literally a buzz that says do something.
They could be, so that would be the notification, but actually if you sit down and then look into the app, it could be providing content. So it could be read or it could be video where you're learning about the right behaviors that lead you towards the desired outcome for that particular therapeutic intervention. It could be that it actually takes you through the modules of CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy. So it's not just the buzzes and the notifications, it's actually a guided therapy course.
But does it require a much higher education level on behalf of the receiver? You know, if I got digital therapy, you know, would I have to have a certain level of understanding to be able to maximize its use? In other words, I'm taking ownership of it by being much smarter in my understanding, being bothered to read it, you know, because I mean, I come from a world of a compliance where, you know, literally people, unless they got effects in a day or two, they would stop taking their medication, you know. So, you know, we've got a big thing about educating. I mean, and also I come from a world where I've seen people take tablets when they're really having toxic events because the doctor told them to do it. So there's something about really educating the person to use this or not.
So I think you could probably say the same for all behavioral therapy. You're going to have a certain level of patient activation to want to engage. Now, the aim here through doing it digitally is you're able to do it at a time and a place that's suitable for them, rather than saying that the next available therapist is in 3 weeks at 3 p.m. on Thursday, which may be completely unsuitable and not manageable to you as a patient. So all behavioral therapy requires a certain level of education and activation to engage. What the digital therapeutics platforms around the world are doing is providing it in a format that is far more designed and user-friendly. It's taking full advantage of all of the UX and UI learnings that we've had from smartphones to make it a more engaging and pleasurable experience for the patient. But as we go back to your earlier comments about changing medicine, there of course will be a level of education needed to support. I think what's really important about the approach that we're taking is that ours is prescribed by the physician. And this is where we aim to capitalize on what we all know is the white coat syndrome that comes through clinical trials. When you put an app like this into the real world, do you get the same level of adherence? Well, for most apps, you probably don't. And we've all seen the stories about how long people engage with a wearable. And the same is true for many of the wellness apps. Here we have something that's going to be prescribed. And most importantly, we want to put the power back in the hands of the patient. This is going to allow the patient the ability to track and monitor their own changes in their health, so that when they go back to the physician, whether it's 3 weeks or 3 months later, they're empowered to be able to say, actually, doc, I've been feeling pretty unwell and this is how I felt. And this is when and why, and let's look at what that means for me, rather than having very little evidence or very little ability for detailed recall in terms of having that dialogue with the patient. So the aim here is to empower both sides.
Hakim, I'm getting so interested in this. I just need to look at the time.
No, I'll just finish up quickly here, Tony. So what we're doing is bringing these together under a single prescription. We've got 2 programs in development, one in insomnia and one in hypertension. Both of those are now entering the clinic. The hypertension study now incorporates COVID-19 monitoring due to the fact that patients with high blood pressure seem to have a higher risk of COVID-19 mortality. So starting a really interesting, exciting study at Queen Mary University, London and Barts. And our hope in the future is to be able to build out that pipeline through co-development opportunities with like-minded pharma and biotech companies, or develop our own pipeline. And there I'll stop and just take questions, probably other than from you, Tony.
Well, it's fab. We could go on for quite some time, but let's get. I mean, we've got a load of things coming in the chat room. Graham, maybe you could curate and get us on time for the rest of our experience.
Absolutely. I think we'll have about 10 minutes of questions. So Kat's going to go first with the first question. Kat, are you there?
Hello, hi, that was really super interesting. So yeah, I have a question basically about interoperability with your system with things like existing electronic health record systems and sort of other things, because I know like electronic health records is a bit of a nightmare, to put it lightly. So like how do you see that working? And also the kind of the data streams that you're going to be capturing, are there any ways to like use those for research to understand like what works for people, matching people's outcomes to adherence and things like that, because that's the kind of information that would be really useful research wise.
So really good question. So on the second question, absolutely, that's exactly what we want to be able to utilize the data for, to be able to start to understand at an individual level what's going to work for that patient, whether it's the right timing of a notification or whether it's the right type of content, whether someone prefers video or a chatbot. So absolutely, and I think a huge amount of research could be done there. In terms of interoperability, we're focusing on the drug plus digital. And I guess there's 2 types of interoperability that we're faced with as an interesting area for us. One is with third-party devices. So for a lot of the pathways that we are working on, we are going to require interoperability with a medical device. So for example, in our hypertension work, we're using a blood pressure cuff. We're not going to go and reinvent the blood pressure cuff. And so there we're using something that's been validated through clinical studies and standard of care. So off-the-shelf on-one blood pressure cuff and through Bluetooth interoperating there. And then when it comes to EMR, yes, so we've gone through a very interesting process of working with Barts to be able to do that for the clinical trial, so we can read and write back into the trial record, and then equally we'll have to do that behind the spine in the NHS going forward.
Great. Okay, Sylvia, could you ask your question, please, without acronyms?
Yes. Yes, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, thanks a lot. Very interesting. Very pleased to have joined this session. You mentioned patient-reported outcomes, and I was wondering how you're going to deal with this, because notoriously it's very difficult to get those as endpoint and approved by the health authorities. So can you expand on this? What are your thoughts, and maybe how CLM can improve on this?
Absolutely. So we certainly don't have sort of a one-size-fits-all approach. So, for example, the work with insomnia, we're using the standard and validated from the ISI, the Insomnia Severity Index, where this is what we have been told through working with key opinion leaders like Dr. David O'Regan, what they want to know and understand from the patient. And equally for the work that we were doing in hypertension, we spent the majority of the beginning of the project just sat down with patient groups at Barts to understand what it is they wanted to report. And ultimately what we have to create is something that both gives validated data that a clinician can make their decision off, and so they need to be standardized patient-reported outcome measures, but we equally need to be able to capture the information that the patient wants to be able to report. So we're doing it in a very bespoke way, on a therapy by therapy area way, and we're learning a lot as we do it.
And sorry, just a follow-up, did you get any regulatory feedback on this approach, if I may ask?
Yes, so one of the things we did very early on, recognizing that this was going to be quite novel, is sit down with the regulators, and actually had a really strong and very dynamic dialogue with the MHRA and the FDA, less so with the EMA, but really pleased with the conversations we've had. So gone through scientific advice with the MHRA, done safe harbor with NICE and MHRA, and recently with the FDA to both clarify how you bring drug and device together, and then also which prompts we're going to use. And yeah, very encouraged by the interaction with the regulators.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot.
Great. Pilar, can you ask your question, please?
Well, very interesting session, and also the questions. I agree that Kat probably asked one of the most important ones, which is interoperability, because without that, it's going to be very difficult to do anything meaningful out there. But anyway, I had one specific one with our experience on DTX, and it's about adherence. And it's a bit of a, I mean, the irony is, of course, patients, long-term chronic patients are showing low adherence to medication, but also they show low adherence to digital therapeutics. Yeah, and it's a question of how do you envision, tackling this issue?
So this is something it's a great question, and it's something we're going to have to learn through the clinical studies we're running now, one in the US and one in the UK. There are a number of factors that we are keen to explore to see if we can drive improvement. So the first is that it's going to be prescribed. So this is something that the physician is asking you to do and take, which I think takes a step further than some of the wellness apps you might just download. The second is the point I was making earlier about putting far more power in the patient's hand to be able to track their own data and have a much more meaningful conversation with the clinician. The first two are carrot. The last is the stick, and that's where a physician prescribing a CLM product is going to be in a position to be able to say, well, how will I know what I'm meant to be doing with you and helping your care if I can see that you haven't filled out anything in your patient diary? We haven't got any information here. We really need you to be engaged in this so that we can get you to your optimum. So we'd prefer to go with lots of carrot, but there is also a stick component here, and that is only made possible because we're joining the two together, the drug and digital. I think when the drug is in isolation and the digital is in isolation, you've got a whole bunch of other challenges. But we aim by bringing the two together to make that ultimately an improved adherence. And behind that and all of that, we have a great internal in-house UX and UI team trying to design the product that really works for patients by not designing it in the isolated ivory tower that is CLM, but going out to the patient groups and sitting down with them. And one of the things we've done is work very closely with organizations like the Association of Medical Research Charities and sit down with the different research charities and go to the patient engagement sessions and work with them. And it's been amazing to see how engaged they've been. We've had patient sessions running over Zoom over the past few months, them ripping apart our clinical trial design, telling us that the app isn't built properly, really helping us and guiding us. The other thing that we're aiming to do long term, and something we discuss very carefully with the regulators, is really trying to think about what is the essence of the medical device and what isn't. Because the piece that needs to be regulated is the medical device. Everything around it can be things that you can learn and iterate in the real world. And being able to separate those two out may offer us opportunities not to have a static device that can't then be modified from real world feedback in the future.
Fantastic. I'm just looking at the time, Graham. I'm wondering, because we've got so many questions, whether
I know.
Split into the groups so then people can ask Hakim the questions close up and personal.
Good idea. If that's good with everybody, why not? That'll take a bit of pressure off. So, okay, we'll do that. We'll do the magic rooms for.
Move around. Graham's going to use his special algorithm, which is taken years. We've got many coders, and it's all in his finger now. And we're going to use that, and then we can meet. You can ask Hakim questions.
We can come back.
And then we'll be coming back into the group, but I'm mindful of time.